Hey, good morning, Joshua. How's it going? Hey, guys. How's it going? Good morning. So I took off Friday and Monday and didn't get a whole lot done. So just kind of getting back into the thick of things right now. Um, Last week, I spent a lot of time working with Ethereum, putting together a couple different variations of an Ethereum application. And I did a lot of proof of concept, but I never actually really drove the example through to completion. Uh, just as a reminder, if you weren't watching the stream last week, essentially I was building a Ethereum contract app or distributed application that was supposed to be functioning like essentially Kickstarter, where you would have a crowd-funded application. So again, I essentially built, I don't know, like 3 or 4, 5 different variations of that app until it kind of was at a place where I was more or less happy with the overall architecture. Um, I settled on a solution that used Next.js for some server-side rendering. We'll take a look at where I left that off at. And yeah, so I kind of did like a proof of concept with Next.js, but I didn't really do any styling or a lot of transitions, a lot of stuff to just make the app look nice. And so I think that's what I have to do today. The application is all about putting together something that I can use in Ethereum course I want to release very early January. And so ideally I would start recording some stuff for the course this week, but unfortunately, given that the big example app is not yet complete, I think that I still have to do a pretty good amount of work before I can actually start recording anything. So that's pretty much what I'm going to be doing today. I got to do a whole bunch of styling for this thing, make sure it looks good. I got to make sure everything works appropriately and all the technology decisions I made were appropriate to show within a course. And once I get that all done, I can start thinking about actually recording some content. This Ethereum course I think is going to be extremely challenging to put together. The reason for that is really, stuff with React, which is what I have a lot of content online right now about. Or, I've got a course on Elixir, a course on Go, a bunch of other stuff. A lot of that people come to a course kind of with a little bit of knowledge already of what the given topic is. So for example, I've got a lot of React courses right now. People come to my React course having a reasonable idea of what React is. Not always, but a lot of the time. However, with all of this Ethereum stuff, I'm really expecting that people are going to say, hey, I know absolutely nothing about Ethereum and what Ethereum is used for, how it works, all that kind of stuff. So I think that the course is going to be really challenging to put together because I really am going to have to spend a tremendous amount of time doing content, assuming that people know absolutely nothing about Ethereum whatsoever. Now it's not a problem. I'm happy to discuss everything about Ethereum, everything from fundamental concepts all the way to giving people a really good idea of exactly what's going on with it. The problem is that content like that, like video content where it's just me kind of lecturing and saying, hey, here's what Ethereum is and here's how it works, usually ends up being kind of boring. In an online course, it's usually, I think, my personal opinion, is that just watching passive videos of lectures is always boring. And that's why in every course I do, I always try to have constant projects going on. We're always working on something. It's always collaborative. We're always writing code. And so in this course, I'm a little bit worried because I kind of think that there might be a little bit too much time that I'm going to have to spend just talking about Ethereum and what it is. So besides this application I want to finish up today, hopefully, I also want to do a lot of thought on exactly how to present all this Ethereum stuff in an actual interesting fashion that people are going to, not only learn about Ethereum and what it is, but also be engaged and, think that it's something interesting and fun as opposed to me just nonstop talking about Ethereum as I'm doing right now, basically. Basically, I don't want to do in the course exactly what I'm doing right now, where I just talk, and don't actually write any code or anything like that. So that's the big challenge. That's what we gotta figure out at some point in the next couple of days. And once we have that, we'll be really set. So that's the big challenge. That's what we're kind of working on today and tomorrow. We're going to finish up some styling on this application, make sure everything works nice, and then we're going to think about how to present everything in a really interesting fashion. All right, so this is the Next.js app right now. So like I said, it is all server-side rendered. As you can see, there's really just not a lot going on at present. I think that I thought I had done a lot more stuff. I think I had remembered myself as doing more on this app than I actually did. So I'm looking at it right now, and I really thought I had done more. I guess, but clearly I did not. There's almost nothing here. So I can see a list of contracts right here. Just as a reminder, again, I know I've said it a billion times on stream in the last week, but this is a crowdfunding app. So these are all deployed crowdfunding contracts that you see right here. So I think that first thing I'll do is a little quick overview of some of the code that I had written, and I'll figure out exactly what I should probably start on this morning. Okay, so here we go. I got this stuff. I think I was just testing out some navigation stuff right here. I think that was pretty much it. Nothing crazy. And I'm kind of curious what I had left off with Web 3. Okay. Yep, that makes sense. I remember this. Got Web 3. New Web 3. All right. Okay. So I think that we're good to go. I think I recall what was going on. So I believe what I have to focus on right now is making sure that you could click on one of these contracts right here and navigate to the actual contract and get some more details about it. So again, just making sure that navigation is working properly. Then we got to do a couple forms so users can create new crowdfunding campaigns. I think that I had also really wanted to do a big rename of a lot of stuff. So I had been calling everything that was floating around here like a crowd fund. Again, the entire application is all about crowdfunding. I'd called everything crowd fund, but late last week I realized that everything would make so much more sense if I called these things campaigns. So like a crowdfunding campaign, essentially. So maybe we should start off by doing that big rename. I think that'd probably be a good place to get started. The rename is really not essential, but I think I'm gonna sleep a little bit more soundly if I just do it and get it done with. So I think we'll start there. Let's see what we have to do for the rename. So I think that we're gonna kill off some built contracts here. I think that'll be good. I think that we'll do a git commit just to kind of be able to revert if we really need to, in case I make some big bad typos. So this will be our initial commit, and if everything goes wrong, then we'll come back to that initial commit. I think that I probably should have not just committed that right there because I don't have a .git ignore file. So we'll do that right now. And I really just want to ignore my node modules directory. Okay, so that looks good. All right, so there's our initial commit. So now we'll do the rename, and if everything goes, or I should say if anything goes wrong, then we'll just flip back and revert all that. So we're gonna do, I don't know if we can get away with just a multi-select here. I think we can. So we'll do campaign. All right, so campaign factory, deployed campaigns, create campaign, campaign. I'm just doing a quick check here of all the changes that just went in, campaign. I think that's it. One other big thing that I ran into last week, or kind of realized at the end of last week. So one thing that you need to be very much aware of whenever you're working with Ethereum is that, one of the core concepts here of Ethereum contracts is that we are essentially paying for the computational power that it takes to execute our contract. One of the known anti-patterns in this world of working with contracts is using for loops, or using any type of loop, I should say, to iterate through a collection that can grow in size unboundedly. So right now, I am allowing someone to contribute to a campaign, a crowdfunding campaign right here. And whenever they do so, I push that person's address, or essentially their identifier, into this approvers array right here. So approvers definitely grows in size unboundedly. This is going to be an array that just grows. And I don't think I have any code that actually has to iterate through that. I don't think there's anything that says, hey, here's the big list of all the, or I'm not doing any iteration through it. So maybe this is something I don't need to worry about right now. I'm trying to remember exactly why I was storing the list of approvers at all. Let's see, I think that it was just to make sure that we had some count of the total number of approvers. Get summary, I think that was it. Although if that's the only thing we're doing here, if we're just using it to store the length, then maybe a better way of treating this would be to say, rather than storing a list of all the addresses, would be to just store a number and increment it every single time someone sends in some money. That might be a better approach here, but I do want to just kind of think through it a little bit. Approvers at message.sender. Why did I do this right here? I think that's a mapping. Yeah, so we had a mapping right here, but I don't recall. I think that might have kind of a gap in my logic right now. So request. Okay. 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 Yeah, so I think that there's a little bit of a gap in my logic right now. The entire idea behind the crowdfunding campaign was that the owner of the campaign, the person running it, has to create a request to spend money from the campaign. And then that request has to be approved by all the contributors. But I'm realizing very quickly right here that the logic I have doesn't actually require someone to be an actual contributor to the campaign in order to approve it. I think I had that at some point, but I just dropped it out at some point in time for some crazy reason. So I think that approve request right here needs a little bit of a refactor to make sure that you can only approve a request if you've actually contributed to the campaign. So maybe we should take care of that little refactor right now. Unfortunately, I also have like 2 other copies of this Ethereum contract floating around on my local machine right now. And I'll have to go back and probably update those as well with this change. Or I could just remember to come to this file and reference this stuff later on. Whatever, I think that we'll, what should we do here? I think we'll finish up our renaming really quick, and then we'll come back and we'll do a refactor around approve request to make sure that we actually only allow people who have contributed to do anything or to actually approve a request. So let's finish up the refactor first. So this is going to be campaign factory, just doing some renaming here. We need to rename our migration script, deploy campaign factory. This will be campaign factory. Looks good. Okay, I think that we're set in this file. I'm now going to put in a test file here. Do campaign like so to run some tests over that contract that I just put together. I specifically want to run some tests and make sure that you can only approve a request if you have actually contributed to the campaign. Now, I've already written a whole bunch of tests around this contract already. So I did not actually bring those tests over to this kind of iteration of the project. So I think that right now I'm just going to go and find one of those other test files that I worked on and just copy the whole thing over. All right, so here is essentially all the different versions of this project I've put together. So we got Crowdfund, which was like just working on the contract, Crowdfund React, which was kind of a initial take on how to get React to work with this crowdfunding stuff. We've got Kickstart, which was, I don't even know what version this was. I think Kickstart right here was like a React version of the app again with a distinct backend server, but I realized that the backend wasn't really strictly necessary. So I've got a version of the app that is strictly HTML. So this is no React whatsoever. And then right now I'm working on Kickstart Next.js, which is the Ethereum app on top of a Next.js backend for doing some server-side rendering. So in one of these folders, I've got some tests. So let's try to find those tests really quickly. One of these Ether tests, here we go, right here. All right, so I think that we're going to just grab this entire test file, all this contents, and we will bring it on over to Campaign Factory. And we're gonna have to do a whole bunch of renaming in here. Okay, so we've got, that looks good. allows new people to contribute money. I think we're just going to have to run these tests and debug them one at a time. The last time I ran these tests, I got a whole bunch failing. So I think there does have to be a little bit of work done in here. So I'm going to get a new terminal window to run these tests. Let's change into our Ether directory, and I should be able to run like truffle test, I think, and that will run those tests. The other thing I should probably do is rebuild. Yeah, so I think I need to do a little bit of rebuilding. Although let's look at this one more time, because actually I didn't quite expect to see this error message right here. So truffle HD, I use that in some project, but I can't imagine exactly where. Here we go, truffle.js. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is some like outdated code that I have in here for deploying my contract to a test network. So I'm just gonna comment this stuff out for right now, and I'll come back to it later on. Right now it's just causing my test to break, so I don't really need it right now. So we'll try truffle test again. These tests do take a little bit of time to run, because it has to compile the test, has to start up a test network, has to deploy them, and then run all the tests around each one. Now in this case, I only have one test running at present. Okay, so here we go. So campaign has not been deployed to detected network. So that's definitely a pretty bad thing to see. I think it's because we are trying to require a script here, or a contract that doesn't actually exist. I had renamed it to Campaign Factory, which you see right there. So there's Campaign Factory. Now the other thing that I'm kind of noticing really quickly is that these tests were all written with the old version of the contract. I did two versions of the Ethereum contract. So one in which we were just working with like a single campaign at a time. And then I've also got this alternate version right here where we are actually, we have this thing called a Campaign Factory that lets us kind of spin up new crowdfunding campaigns on the fly. So I think that we're probably signing ourselves up here for way more work than I expected with this testing stuff, but I think I do have to rewrite the tests anyways at some point, so might as well do it now. So yeah, really going down a rabbit hole right now, as it were. But yeah, we'll give this a shot. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff we need to figure out here really quickly. So you can see that the original test I had written was really about testing one copy of a campaign, or like one instance of a campaign. However, like I just said, the contract that we are working with right now allows us to spin up multiple crowdfunding campaigns. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to modify the test to work with these two separate contracts and use the factory to spin up one campaign and then somehow get a reference to this individual campaign right here. So definitely got some learning ahead of us. I think the first thing we need to do is really start basic and figure out what we're actually working with here, what this campaign thing is. So this is important right here, like figuring out what this thing is, because usually all the Truffle documentation, and when I'm using Truffle for testing this stuff, all the Truffle documentation kind of assumes you've got a single contract inside of a file. But as you can see, I clearly have two separate contracts in here right now. So we're gonna have to just figure out like exactly what this thing that I just required in is. So let's figure that out. So we'll rerun our tests again, and we should see that console log. And hopefully it should give us a better idea of what we're working with. I'm thinking that that thing that we're working with is going to be the Campaign Factory contract itself. So here's the console log. I'm going to look for, yeah, here we go. This stuff right here. I think that what I have to do is look at one of the method names on here. So I'm going to look for something called create campaign. Maybe up a little bit. So this is the raw contract right here. Okay. So we've got a get and a set on the ABI, but that's not super helpful. Contract name is campaign. So we're working with the Campaign Factory right here. That's what we're working with. So we're gonna have to use this object right here. We're gonna rename this to actually show what it is used for. Campaign Factory, there we go. Campaign Factory. So I need to use this Campaign Factory right here to create a new campaign, and then we're gonna run some tests around that thing. So all this assertion stuff, we're gonna have to rewrite a little bit to work with this new contract setup. Definitely not super fun, but we got to do it. The other thing that I should probably be thinking about here is it'd be really nice if we could somehow kind of generalize this logic. So every single one of these tests, we're going to have to be creating a new campaign, and that's going to be a lot of repetitive logic. So I'm going to make sure that I write this code right here in such a way that I can easily extract it to a separate helper function. That'd be really nice. Okay, so we got accounts, we got campaign factory to work with, we've got campaign deployed. So I think that what we are going to do is create a new function. Let's call this get campaign instance. I think that'll take the campaign factory like so. Campaign deployed. What's the best way to do this? Maybe this won't take an argument at all. Yeah, I don't think it will. Okay, and let's do an arrow function here. Async. Okay, all right. Yeah, so here's the fun part. This is where things are going to start getting really good. So we're going to get a reference to the factory instance. So this is what we use to create new copies or new campaigns, new crowdfunding campaigns. So this gives us a reference to the instance. We then have to call a method on there to create the new campaign. So on factory instance, I think we should be able to call create campaign. We'll just invoke it like so. We have to pass along some minimum value. We'll pass along 100. That'll work for right now. What else do we need? I think that we might need to pass in the account that we want this to come from. Like so. And then what does this actually, I don't think it returns anything. I think it returns the address. Oh yeah, it returns the address of the newly created campaign. So we'll call that campaign address. Actually, let's call it address, keep life simple. Okay, so there's our address. And then I'm going to make sure that it's really clear exactly how I might call this. So get campaign instance, I'll pass in accounts at 0. I'm going to await that. I'll assign that to instance, like so. Now the last thing I think I have to do is, I've got the address right here, but that doesn't actually describe exactly what the thing is. It's just the address of the campaign. And so I need to somehow take that address and turn it into one of these campaign things right here. So how are we going to do that? I think we need to look at some documentation on Web3 really quick, because we're going to need to use that to actually make this happen. So we'll look at Web3.js at GitHub. And once I pull up this documentation, I'll take a short break to just explain what the heck's going on right now. Last week was the first week I started to stream stuff, and I noticed really quickly that I was spending a little bit too much time talking about stuff, and so this week I'm going to try to focus a little bit more on really getting stuff done. But I still want to make sure that anyone who's watching has some reasonable idea of what's going on and what I'm trying to do at any given point. All right, so here we go. Again, I'm going to pull up the documentation, and then we'll do a quick pause. I just want contract right here. There we go. Okay, so back here. All right, so again, we've got this thing called a campaign factory, like so. We've got the campaign factory. What we're trying to do is use the factory to create a new instance of a campaign. So I get the factory. Here's the factory. We use the factory to create a new campaign. We call create campaign. But when we call create campaign, that doesn't actually create and return a campaign, like a crowdfunding campaign. It actually returns the address of a campaign. So I need to somehow take that address and turn it into an actual instance of a crowdfunding campaign. Now to do that, I'm going to use the Web3 library, which you see right here. So this is Web3.js. Web3 is kind of our portal from JavaScript world to Ethereum world. To get an actual kind of a handle on the newly deployed campaign, I'm going to call this function right here. So web3.f.contract. And I have to pass in something called an ABI array. An ABI array you can think of as essentially like a kind of API documentation. An ABI array describes all the different methods that a given contract has. So I need to somehow pass in the ABI array right here. And then after I do that, I'm going to chain on another method to it called .at or @address. So @address essentially says, okay, you now know about exactly how a given contract behaves. And now to hook the actual thing up, we call .at_address, and that kind of allows us to assume the definition of this given contract that we just deployed. I also see some chat. Joshua, you're asking about what I'm using to test locally. Joshua, to test locally, all these are all essentially Mocha tests that you see right here. Mocha and name escapes me right now. Chai. It's Mocha and Chai. And to do all this testing, one is correct. I'm using something called Truffle. Truffle you can kind of think of as being Ethereum contract management. So it helps us write and manage contracts that we want to deploy to the Ethereum network. So just one feature of Truffle is to kind of set up this testing harness where we can easily test contracts that we write. In practice, you spend a lot of time with Truffle because you are totally correct. Like deploying stuff to the Ethereum network, first off, it costs money. So we don't want to spend a lot of money on this. Second off, it's very time intensive to actually deploy and test contracts manually. And so writing really solid tests like this right here is a huge improvement to our development process because it allows us to write some plain JavaScript tests. They are challenging to write, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And the good thing about it is that the tests run far, far, far faster than if we were to manually deploy the contract and then manually start calling methods on it and whatnot. So the tests, at the end of the day, really save us a lot of time. All right, so back to this thing. We need to get a reference to Web3 in here. It's going to be a little bit of an issue. I got to think about this for just half a second. Let's make sure we got a reference to Web3. So console log Web3 like so. Let's just make sure that's working. Okay, yeah, it's probably going to work just fine. Just want to look at this contract really quickly. This was the console log that I had previously done. Okay, so Web3 is nested on there. Okay, campaign. Properties. Okay, so this is going to be really interesting. So like I said, this require statement right here, so it's importing a campaign factory. So here's the campaign factory right here. Here's the contract for it, and this is the overall campaign factory file. So like I just said a moment ago, to actually get a handle on the contract that I'm actually trying to deal with, I need to have access to the contract ABI. The ABI is like the JavaScript definition of our contract and how it works. So the ABI of campaign factory would be an array of objects that describe the create campaign and get deployed campaign functions and how they work and the arguments they take and what they actually return. So the challenge that we're going to very quickly run into here is I need to get a reference to not the campaign factory ABI. I have easy access to this thing right now. What I really need a reference to is the contract campaign down here. So I need to figure out a way to actually require in or get access to this campaign right here. I think that we might need to look at a little bit of Truffle documentation to figure out how to do that, because I definitely don't know how to do it off the top of my head. So let's look at Truffle.js. And maybe we should do a Google search as well. Truffle.js, like, I don't know, multiple contracts test, I don't know. Test multiple contracts? Sure, I think that sounds reasonable. Test multiple contracts. Yeah, this looks relevant. Yeah, so this is pretty close to what we're running into right here. See, they're deploying. Okay, doesn't look helpful. We'll also pull up the official documentation while that is going. Truffle framework, here we go. How can I have two contracts in Truffle test? Yeah, this is pretty relevant to what I'm looking at. Let's see what they say here. All right. Blah, blah. No. Made sure all the contracts were in Truffle.js. Truffle deploy, really address, blah, blah, blah. I don't need the, seems to get the address deployed. Okay, that doesn't seem relevant either. I think we're gonna have to look at some of the documentation. If you haven't looked at the Truffle documentation yet, this is one of the core tools that we use for working with Ethereum in JavaScript world. The documentation, I think, is like middle quality. The documentation will tell you very clearly how to do specific things, but it does not give you a great overview of exactly what's going on. And it doesn't give you a lot of patterns that you can easily follow. So there's good things and bad things about Truffle. It's definitely better than nothing is what I would say, without a doubt. Here's artifacts require. That's what I'm pretty sure. Yeah, here we go. Artifacts require documentation. This is what we really need. Okay. Okay, well that makes life easy then. So artifacts required. All right, so the documentation, again, I'm trying to get a reference of the actual campaign contract itself. And that documentation right there seems to indicate that if I do just require campaign like so, things will just work. I'm not sure that I really believe that, so let's do another campaign, another console log of campaign in here just to see what's going on. Of course, as usual, if anyone has any questions about what I'm up to, what I'm doing here, anything related to Ethereum whatsoever, just let me know and I'd be happy to expand and answer exactly what I'm up to. All right, so this is the contract right here. Again, I'm trying to get access to the contract ABI. I'm not sure that I actually need the ABI at this point. You know, actually, I think I don't. All right, so here's what we're going to do now. We're going to do return. What are we going to do here? Let's const await campaign dot at address. I think that's it. And then we'll return instance. Let's actually do something a little bit more meaningful than that. Let's do an actual assertion on this thing. So how about owner? Yeah, I think that's good. Let's do, so let me think about this for a second. Yeah, okay, so we need to do const instance is get campaign instance. We're going to pass in accounts at 0. That's the person who's actually going to create the contract. And then we should be able to assert something like, assert equal instance dot, I think we're going to have to do another async call in here. What do I want to do? Async dot owner. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Await owner call. And then we should be able to do owner address. Assert equal owner address. Actually, we'll put that one second. Accounts at 0. Okay, let's try this out. Who pays for the transactions and gas prices? Is it the contract owner or the user? Joshua, it comes down to exactly who is actually making the call. So the direct answer to you, Joshua, is whoever calls a function on the contract is responsible for the gas prices. That's something that makes life really, really interesting, because anytime we start making these distributed applications, if our expectation is that our user should be modifying the data within a contract, then that operation has to be valuable enough to our users that they're willing to spend money for it. So one of the common things that people start thinking about with Ethereum stuff is they start thinking, oh, this is great. We're going to make like a decentralized version of Facebook, right? And it's all going to be super anonymous. You know, no one's hosting these assets, nothing like that. Well, the problem with that entire approach, or thinking that you're going to make any type of social network based on Ethereum at all, is that it costs money to modify the data in these contracts. So essentially, if you wanted to make Facebook on top of Ethereum, you would have to get your users to pay like, $3 or something to post a status update. Because anytime you want to allow your user to modify the data, they have to spend money. So that actual modification they're making, it has to be something that's really valuable to them. Otherwise, they're going to say, well, let's see, I could either make a status update and pay $3 for that, or I could go over to Facebook right now and do a update for free. And so that's one of the really interesting aspects of Ethereum. How do you actually make these operations worth something to your users? That's something in the course that I'm going to eventually make on this stuff, that's something that I hope to make sure is really clear. All right, so it looks like our test failed here. Cannot read property call of undefined. That's really bad. So that's, okay, so I just reran the test right here, but this is going to fail again. So essentially, again, I'm trying to get a reference to the actual campaign instance right here. Clearly, there it is. There's my problem. Okay, let's try this again. Owner call. Okay. All right. All right, invalid address passed to campaign.at. We passed in an object. So basically this thing right here, I thought it was going to be the address. It clearly is not. So I think we'll do a console log of address and figure out exactly what that thing is. Fintech, my goal right now, this is, my plan right now is for this to be like the final project. I kind of think that I've got like another app or two kind of already put together. And I expect that I'm going to do those other like 1 or 2 apps, and then this will be the final project for the course. And then you asked about the release date. Release date is going to be early January, hopefully. But, we'll see how that comes together. I know if you look at the calendar and it's December 5th right now, you might be thinking, Steven, you got a month to make this course. How long does it really take? Well, unfortunately, making courses usually takes a little bit longer than people think. So even though I've got a month before this thing really needs to be complete, honestly, that's going to be kind of tight. So hopefully we'll make that date, but no guarantee. You never know. Okay, so I called create campaign right here, hoping that it would return an address. It clearly did not, so something is not quite working the way I'd been hoping. I ran into this last week, but gotta start thinking, remember exactly what I did last week. So create campaign, when we call create campaign right here, the intent was to return an address. So this is the address saying like, hey, here's the newly created campaign. That is clearly not the case right now. When we call create campaign, we're getting back like essentially a transaction. So we'll update that to be transaction. So we need to somehow inspect this transaction and get a better idea of exactly how we turn this transaction to the campaign address that we actually care about. Like I said, I ran into this last week, so rather than struggle on it, I think I'll reference my code from last week and get a reminder on how I handled this. So we'll go up 2 directories. Again, these are all the different versions of this app and another app or 2 that I put together. Fintech asked about whether or not there would be another app for this course, and I had said yes. The other app that I was hoping to include, and I kind of still have to come up with a third one, I think, but at least the second app was going to be like a lottery style application where you can enter in some number of people to a lottery that is an Ethereum smart contract, and then at a certain point in time, the lottery picks a winner and sends a bunch of money to that person. So that hopefully is going to be like the second project that we're going to take care of here. All right, so contracts new. I feel like that's where I put it maybe. Create crowdfund. Campaign address. That's right. So we got to do the call. Okay. So dot call. that should return, oops, here we go. So that should return the address. And then we're going to do that thing again, like so. Okay. So this code right here probably looks really interesting, or kind of off right here. If you look carefully, you can see that I take the factory instance, I reference, to be precise, I reference create campaign, and I have .call, and I assign that to some variable called address, and then right underneath it, I call factory instance .create campaign, and I call that with the same arguments as before. So the only difference between these two lines right here is the presence of this .call thing. .call is used whenever we want to make a read-only function call to an Ethereum contract. So .call will not modify any data sitting inside the contract. We can use .call to either retrieve some information from a contract. That's its primary use. We use it whenever we want to read some data. It's a free operation. We don't have to spend any money to use call. Not only does it retrieve information, it can also simulate a write function call. So it can simulate us calling a function and writing some data to the contract. So that's what I'm doing here. I am kind of faking out the contract and saying, okay, I'm going to call .call, which is going to simulate a write to it, and that is going to return an address of the newly created contract. So after I do this kind of fake call to the contract, I then do the real call right after it. The reason I've got the two right here is that when we do the fake call, it returns the address of the new contract that is about to be completed, whereas the write operation right here actually executes it and actually writes this new update to our campaign. So then after we do the actual update right here, we then have the address that we had obtained previously up here. This is essentially, it's kind of like a chicken and an egg thing. Like we're getting an address right here to a contract that doesn't yet exist, and then we actually go and create it. So kind of like a chicken and egg kind of deal. Let's do another console log here just to test this thing out and make sure that approach is going to work. A video tutorial about basic aspects of Ethereum, smart contracts, Web3, and Truffle. That's the goal. That's what I'm definitely trying to do here. I mean, that's going to be the end result of all this stuff. It's going to be a really strong overview of Ethereum, contracts, Web3, Truffle. We might touch on Geth a little bit. Essentially just cover the ecosystem, make sure that's really clear exactly how this stuff all fits together. And hey, it looks like our test is passing, so that's fantastic. Min also has an important question. Should I switch to a job using the newest tech, AWS Lambda, Node.js, React, GraphQL, working in a company with only 3 people, or should I stick to just front-end dev with React? Min, that's a great question. I think that the answer to your question your question has a lot more factors than just the technology. So you're kind of approaching this employment question from a technology perspective of, what's going to be better. I think what you're asking here is what's going to be better for you in the long run as far as technology choice. I think that you need to take many other factors into account. So that's great that they're using Lambda and GraphQL and React all together. Are they, are you confident that they are using them well? Are they going to teach you strong patterns? Are you going to really understand how to use these tools? If you don't have a lot of faith in those 3 people, well, maybe that's not the best situation to get into. The other thing is, if it's 3 people, I suspect it's probably a small startup. If it is a startup, I would really get good focus and a really clear picture on whether or not you expect that startup to ever go anywhere. I can tell you that I have worked at several startups and worked with several startups at this point, and over time I've definitely gotten kind of disillusioned, I think, by startups, mostly because I think too many startups do not focus enough on making money and actually paying the bills, and there's too much of a focus on raising money. And there's very good reasons for that, but I think I'm kind of burnt out on startups a little bit for right now. So Min, if you're knowing absolutely nothing beyond the 2 sentences you wrote, if you're at a good job right now where you're learning a lot, you might stick at that for a little bit as opposed to taking a dive on a startup. But again, a lot of different factors that go into that. So Min, if you want to share anything else about the 2 opportunities, I could definitely help you make a decision there. But it's kind of tough without knowing a lot more about it. Hey Casey, how's it going? Didn't stream yesterday, Casey. Got back onto it today, so still doing some Ethereum stuff. All right, so back on topic here. So we've now figured out how to actually get a reference to a newly created campaign. So again, I had written all these tests right here with the old version of the campaign, so I have to do some refactoring to make them work with the new version. So what I've got right here, I think that we need to rename the it block here. So campaign factory allows new campaigns to be created. I think that's appropriate. And I think I'll add a new test right underneath this to actually test the campaign itself. Contract campaign allows people to contribute money. That looks good. So again, we'll get our instance. And then we're going to reuse all this stuff right here. So no longer do we need this. All right, so we've got instance from accounts. We're going to do accounts 1 this time to just make sure it's someone else. Approvers count. Yeah, I think we're ready to run this test right here. Yes, Casey. Busy during the holidays. The holiday season is always my busiest time just because I usually end up doing a lot of travel while also still trying to put out courses and contract stuff and whatnot. So a lot of stuff going on. Okay, so I think that we're on, got a second test here working, which is great. Casey, I made a change to how my contract works, the crowdfunding contract works last week, or just this morning, excuse me. And so I'm now going back through and updating some tests to just make sure that all the behavior works as it did before. Min, I see that you're saying that you might have to learn by yourself and you really like learning. I know it's always fun to jump on the newest technology, and I've definitely gone to, there's one job in particular that I took a couple years back because I wanted to work with a different technology. At the time, I think it was a good decision. In retrospect, I don't know if it was. Following the newest technology around is always interesting, but yeah, I think it's just a personal choice. If it's something, if you are really excited about working with that new technology, I know that I was for what I was working with at the time. It's whatever is going to continue to get you to get up out of the bed in the morning. That's what it's all about, right? It requires a minimum contribution. 50. It's coming from 1. Let's try this. Next course on Udemy is going to be on Ethereum, probably with a focus somewhat on React. That's what I'm working on right now. So this is one of the applications you'll probably end up seeing eventually within the course. Still doing a lot of low-level stuff around it. Like I said on stream this morning a couple times, I've built out several versions of this application now, and it's what I usually do in all my courses. I usually make several versions of any given application that you see from a course to make sure that it just really suits what I'm trying to convey and all that kind of good stuff. So it allows creator to create payment requests. $100, just 1, wait, instance requests at 1. Request. Get summary, request count. Yeah, I think this is good. Fund artist, 1. Create request of payment. Okay, this looks good. Let's try this. Hopefully we're going to be up to 4 tests passing now. We'll see really quickly. All right, so invalid number of arguments to solidity function. I probably just renamed something at some point in time and forgot to take it into account. So let's see, we call campaign instance right here. I think that's okay. We've got our instance, create request. I think that might be where something went wrong. So create request, we're supposed to pass in a description, an amount, and recipient. I think that's where it went wrong. So we don't need that anymore. description, amount, recipient. Description, amount, recipient. That looks good. And then when we return this thing, what do we return? Nothing, I think. Oh, okay, we get reference to the request itself. So request is going to return with a description, amount, recipient, approval count. Description, amount, recipient, approval count, and complete, which is false. All right, that looks good. So let's run this again. Most other jobs want people for the long term, but seems like people move around a lot in software. Yeah, absolutely accurate. I've got tons of friends in the Bay Area who work at industries or in industries beyond besides tech, and very common to see those people working at jobs much longer than people in tech. There are exceptions, of course. I see, I'm friends with a number of mechanical engineers, and I see a lot of movement of mechanical engineers and, you know, like corrosion engineers and electrical engineers. I see them change jobs frequently. However, the funny thing is that they are moving jobs between large tech companies as well. So they are kind of job hopping between like Tesla or SpaceX or Samsung and Google, working on mechanical and electrical engineering stuff. So I don't think it's necessarily related to tech. I think it's more kind of like an attitude here in the Bay right now. And I think that you find that same mechanic at a lot of tech jobs at other locations in the US as well. I think that for whatever reason, for tech people, you do see movement, but it happens for other industries as well. It's super ironic because it, you know, in my mind, all the experience that I have working at companies and teams of people, so much churn or just having employees leave and having to re-educate people on how your particular tech stack works at your company is so expensive. And it takes so much time to get people up to speed, but there doesn't always seem to be a huge effort in retaining talent. You know, it kind of seems like, oh, you want to quit? You want to go somewhere else? Okay, go for it. We'll just hire someone else. And then you get these companies who then spend, you know, $10,000, $20,000 on a recruiter to find someone new, and then you take 2 months to get that new person up to speed. It's just crazy. It's crazy. It seems like if you want to retain these people, better off to just give them like, you know, a raise every 3 or 6 months just to keep them as happy as possible, just to retain them for longer. But I don't know. You know, I've only hired a handful of people. You know, so maybe there's some insight that I don't quite have around retaining software engineers. That is entirely possible. Anyway, so back here, we've got a VM exception while executing the eth call. We got invalid opcode. I think I know what's going on here. Let's see, we're calling create request. What could be, no, that doesn't seem accurate. What's going wrong here? Oh, I think that what we want to do is get requests at 0. Let's try that. All right. Waiting for the compiling every time we run the tests does seem like it's a hassle. Nonetheless, this is all so much faster than if we were to manually deploy the contract every time and try to test all this stuff manually. So I know it might seem like this takes a long time to get through, but really it's significantly faster than the alternative. All right, now this one's gonna be a little bit nasty. So we are allowing funders to approve a request right here. So let's see, we want to probably take this right here. We're already doing that. So now I want to contribute from accounts to, I'm going to contribute 1,000 way. We're then going to approve a request. How do we approve request now? Approve request at ID. Request push ID. I think it's just going to be 0. Approve request 0 from accounts to. Yeah, that looks good. That's going to be 0. There's the request. Third argument of the request is going to be 1. Yeah, that looks appropriate. All right, let's try this. All right, compiling. How we doing? All right, 5 passing. Okay, so this was what all this test stuff is all about. Like I said a little bit ago, I think that there's a hole in the logic of my contract. I think that the idea here is that only people who fund money to the campaign should be allowed to approve a request. But I think that right now that is not actually being enforced. So we're going to write another test here. I just duplicated the one above. We're going to make sure that people, non-funders, cannot approve a request. That's the goal here. So right here, let's see, we create a request. We then take the second account, or the account at index 2, and we contribute some money, and then we use that to approve a request. So I think that if we say that we are not going to contribute any money, then I would expect this thing to fail. My expectation right now is that it's going to pass, which would be an error. So let's see what happens. So if it passes, it actually fails. That's a funny way of putting it. All right, so it passes, which is not supposed to be the case. So let's first fix up the test so that it fails appropriately. So if this right here, requests at 3.toString, the purpose of this right here is it tells us how many people have actually approved this campaign request so far. It should be 0. So I just had it equal to 1, and the test was passing. Again, that was erroneous behavior. It should have not been passing. So I'm going to change this to 0 right here. So now if I reran the tests again, they would fail. And so I'm going to have to go back to the contract itself and improve some of the logic in there to make sure that this thing actually fails appropriately. Joshua is asking, is Solidity going to be a big undertaking in this course? Looking over it, I can't really see any differences from JavaScript. Joshua, yeah, I think that there's going to be a reasonable amount of stuff around Solidity. I know that maybe it looks kind of similar to JavaScript, but there are some distinct differences, mostly in what you are allowed to do with Solidity. I think that the big challenge with it is just understanding these kind of like corner cases. For example, some return value. You're not allowed to return some types of data from a Solidity function. Right now, you cannot there's not effective handling of 2-dimensional arrays. You know, some of these kind of corner cases that makes life a little bit challenging. There's differences in the type of variable, or what's the best way of putting it, like storage location. So if we look at this contract right here, at the very top, we are defining a instance variable. I shouldn't say instance, this is not technically an instance variable, but if you look at this, it might look like an instance variable. This right here is some amount of data that gets stored on the blockchain along with our contract. That is distinctly different from a local variable that we want to store only in memory. So these kind of like corner things that you just need to know about. So I'd say that the big challenge in Solidity is not understanding the syntax. If you understand JavaScript syntax, you're going to be just fine with Solidity. It's more about understanding some of the big restrictions and best practices around it. That's where we're going to probably spend a lot of time on in the course. Casey, you got a question. Try to understand why dispatch gets placed in the action creator, but not when you're using Axios with Thunk. Compared to not using Axios, and dispatch gets placed outside the action creator. Casey, I do have a video on YouTube about Redux Thunk. I don't know if you've ever watched that before, but it kind of describes what's going on with Redux Thunk. I think the key to understanding Redux Thunk is to look at the source code for it. And the source code, when you first look at it, it's not going to like just make everything crystal clear, but it at least gives you a better idea of what's going on simply because of how simple it is. And maybe I shouldn't even say simple, but how few lines of code it is. So here's the source code to Redux Thunk right here. Yeah, this is it. Literally, this is it. 14 lines of code. That is Redux Thunk. So with Redux Thunk, what you really want to be looking at is these lines of code right here. This is the real heart of Redux Thunk. If you look at this, it essentially says if you returned, or if your action creator is trying to dispatch, or excuse me, what's the best way of putting this? If your action creator is trying to return a function, then we're going to call that function that you just returned from the action creator with a first argument of dispatch and a second argument of getState. Otherwise, if that action creator did not return a function, then we're going to treat it like a normal action. So this right here, this is the meat and potatoes of Redux Thunk. So essentially, if you are returning a function from the action creator, treat it slightly differently. Otherwise, let it go through and treat it as normal. Once you look at this source code right here, it makes things just a little bit more clear, but you still have to play around with Redux Thunk a little bit on your own to really understand what's going on. Casey, you said that you have not watched that video. I would recommend you check out that Redux Thunk video. It's posted under the channel that I'm streaming from right now, so Rally Coding. It's called, like, I don't know, something Redux Thunk. I think it's one of the first videos I posted from this account. But yeah, okay, I'm glad that makes a little bit of sense. Like, I really recommend you keep that source code handy because Thunk is more straightforward than a lot of people think about. Also, a question about Redux Saga. I get a lot of requests about Redux Saga. I personally am just not a fan of Saga because it introduces another kind of crazy API to an application that I think is not quite as easy to reason about as people sometimes claim. I think that the async await syntax, along with Redux Thunk, goes a long way to kind of acting as a substitute to Saga. Saga does more, and there's certain things that it does better than Thunk, but Thunk you can get pretty far with, and it's almost always going to be pretty clear to future engineers what you're attempting to do. Whereas with Saga, once you pass that code off to another engineer, they really have to sit down with the documentation and study your code to get a good idea of how things are going on your app. Just a little bit of insight from me, if you're all curious. One of the earlier, I think maybe the first professional Redux app that I worked on. So I'd worked on React apps previously, but they used Flux as opposed to Redux. So the first Redux app that I worked on, we tried integrating in RxJS. So some like observable patterns. And there was just so much magic floating around that that app very quickly turned into an unreadable mess, and actions would be dispatched without us having any idea why. And it was so hard to trace down what was going on with RxJS. And I got to tell you, whenever I look at Redux Thunk, I start getting that same feeling. The same feeling that I had when we were using RxJS, where it was starting to get kind of challenging to understand the real flow of logic in the application. And I think that RxJS might be more complicated than Redux Saga. I could believe that. I could definitely believe that. Joshua is asking about, didn't I originally teach Redux Promise? Yes, I taught Redux Promise originally because I think that it's far easier to understand what's going on than Redux Thunk. That was the big reason for it. I think that it's far easier to understand Redux Promise than Redux Thunk when you're first coming into the Redux world. Because with Redux Thunk, you have to have some understanding of what that dispatch function is and how to use it to handle async requests. But with Redux Promise, you can pretty much just say, okay, make a request or something that generates a promise and then return it on the payload property. And by the time that thing shows up in the reducer, boom, there's your data. So it really made life very easy, very straightforward, as opposed to Redux Thunk, where you have to have a reasonable amount more knowledge of what's going on. So that's why I chose to do Redux Promise. Have I used tools like Storybook? Yes, I have. I think Storybook is awesome, but I think that it's most useful for large projects where you end up having more reusable components. My experience with Storybook is that if you're working on a smaller application where you have more containers and more containers that have action creators hooked up to them where they're pulling Redux state, I felt like Storybook wasn't quite as useful. Storybook was most useful, I think, whenever I've made reusable components. And you tend to see more reusable components on larger projects, or at least that's my belief and my experience so far. Okay, anyways, a lot of questions, totally awesome. Happy to see them. I do want to look back at this test right here. So non-funders cannot approve a request. I need to get this thing working. Let's take a look and we'll think about how we're going to make this happen. So again, the whole issue right now is that after a campaign owner creates a request, contributors have to approve it. The issue is that we don't have any good way of deciding whether or not the person who is sending this approval in has actually donated to the campaign or not. So I think that to solve this, we're going to have to kind of change the data structure inside of our application a little bit. So at present, whenever someone donates some money, we store their address into this approvers array right here. I think we're going to change this out. Like I said earlier, an anti-pattern with Solidity is to have to do any type of recursion over a array if that array is going to grow to be of like arbitrary size or arbitrary length. So I think that a better approach here might be to put together a mapping. And a mapping we could think of as being like a JavaScript object, essentially, where the keys are an address of an approver, and then the value might be a Boolean of like true to say that this person has donated money. So I think that we're going to do that. Now, the other thing that's going to change really quickly here is the purpose as it stands of that approvers array is to return the number of people who have actually donated money. And so that's no longer going to be available. So I think we're going to have to create a second variable here that records the number of people who have contributed to the campaign. So let's make these two changes. Let's do a mapping of address to Boolean. This will be approvers. And then we'll do also a uint32. I don't know, we'll do 16, doesn't really matter. Public approver count, like so. I think that's going to work. So now, get approvers count. We don't need this anymore. So now whenever someone contributes money, like it's shown right here, I think that we should probably start here. So at present, we are just adding them to that approvers array. So this thing is no longer an array. It's now going to be a mapping. So I think we'll do approvers at message.sender equals true. We also need to decide whether or not we need to increment the approver count variable right here. So I think for that, we will first do a check and we'll say if approvers at message.sender does not exist, so this is brand new, then we're going to do approvers, actually just this line right here, and approvers count plus plus, like so. I think that's good. I think that's it. So approvers at message.sender, if that person has never donated, we're going to increment the number of approvers and we're going to add this person in. Okay, I like that. So now the next thing we need to do is whenever someone tries to approve a request, which is this right here, we're going to make sure that this person is an actual donator. So if we're going to require that approvers at message.sender is true. So if this person is within our approvers mapping right here, then we are going to allow them to continue through this function. Otherwise, we're going to reject them out. Okay, so that looks good. The next thing we have to do is fix up our finalize approval function right here. So to finalize a request, we're currently requiring that there are greater than like 50% people have approved this request. So we need to update the calculation right here. This is now going to be approvers count divided by 2. I think that'll work. And is there anything else? I think this right here is probably going to be it. So approvers.length, that no longer exists. That's now going to be approvers count, like so. All right, now that's a lot of refactoring very quickly here. So rather than running any tests or anything like that, I'm going to pull up the Solidity IDE, or we'll just go to Remix. We're just going to paste in our contract and make sure I don't have any simple typos here. Russ has a question. You've enjoyed my React Native Redux course. I'm glad you have enjoyed it. What are my thoughts on create React Native app in the Expo SDK? So Russ, I've used Expo a lot, and I've also used the React Native CLI to generate a project a lot. My take on it right now is that Expo is fantastic. It's the best thing in the world, but only when it's working correctly. So sometimes, I don't know if you've noticed this as you've gone through the course, but sometimes the Expo SDK sometimes doesn't work quite so well. You know, maybe it'll throw errors when you try to share the app with a friend. Maybe you make a change to the application. It doesn't actually get propagated to your mobile device. Those are some things that don't really happen when you're using the native projects that you generate using the React Native CLI. But when Expo works, it is without doubt faster. So, you know, all these issues with Expo that I see, it seems like they're always like, it doesn't really seem like there's rhyme or reason behind a lot of them. I haven't really been able to get some repeatable method or means of debugging some of these issues. But in general, the goal of Expo is to really be the place and the way to get started with React Native. And I think they've made great strides on getting there. So yeah, to answer your question, I think that if I was going to start today on some new application, React Native app, I think I would probably use Expo personally. Now, you said that you're having problems with Expo and Node modules versions. Are you saying issues with Expo and specific versions of libraries you're trying to install? Because if that's the case, Expo shouldn't be throwing a lot of errors in that regard unless it's an application or a library that's supposed to work with React Native itself. You've been using Expo with apps, and yeah. If you ever want to show them off, yeah, you got to be using Expo. All right, let's see. Approver count. I think I got a typo in here. Approver count. And there's one more error in here. Approver count. So let's see. I had some typos in here. I had approvers. I've got like every spelling this thing you could possibly imagine. So I think we're going to make this thing approvers count after all. Approvers count. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so that looks good. Let's try out our test now and see what happens. You're going to build a fresh app and copy over all React Redux. Yeah, that sounds good to me, Russ. That sounds good. Amin, good books, websites, or resources. I kind of would caution you against any books just because all this stuff changes so frequently. And if there's anything I've learned about Ethereum myself, it's that everything Ethereum changes so much. It's ridiculous all the time. So I can't really recommend any books. As far as websites or other resources, YouTube, I think, is a great resource. You can watch anything by the official Ethereum channel, and they've got tons of great videos on there giving you a general overview of what's going on. It seems like the problem with a lot of documentation around Starter or stuff to help people with Ethereum is they don't really plan out what they're trying to say, and they also put in way too many like buzzwords and marketing stuff. So anytime I see a presentation about Ethereum and it starts off saying like, this is going to be anonymous and decentralized and it's going to change the world and we're going to disrupt financial institutions, it seems like there's a really high correlation between people talking about those aspects of Ethereum and the presentation not being very useful. So I haven't found many resources where people just give very well thought out, crystal clear definitions of what Ethereum is. To be honest, that's kind of why I'm creating this course. I feel like there's kind of a gap in materials right now, and my goal is to create content that just crystal clear explains what Ethereum is, what it's useful for, what it's not useful for, and as much as possible, avoid any mention of marketing aspects of Ethereum. That's my goal. And I don't know if there's a lot of stuff out there right now for actually making that happen. Really quickly, I'm going to look at some of these tests here, get these things working again. So get approvers count is not a function. That is totally expected. Which test was that? Allows people to contribute money. Approvers count. Approvers count. Cool. Run that. And then we've got an invalid opcode on the latest test right here. Yep. Sure. I mean, my pleasure. Joshua, you felt like you had to hack at React Native a lot to get things done that you wanted. I think that the running theme of React Native, and I first heard this at a meetup around React Native like a year and a half ago, I think. So it was a meetup at, I think it was at Facebook headquarters itself about React Native. I think it was at Facebook. And someone on stage from Airbnb got up. Airbnb relies on React Native a lot for their mobile applications. And one thing that the presenter said that really stuck with me was, with React Native, it seems like to really get your application working, all the work comes from the last 10% of React Native app. And that has been, without a doubt, I think the best summary of the state of React Native, where it's so easy to get started and it's so easy to build like most of your application. But then the final 10% of any React Native app is where things start to really fall apart. And that last 10% usually ends up being stuff around like either navigation or working with native device APIs, like working with the camera, the microphone, or whatever else, working with the contact list. It seems like that last 10% is where like maybe 60% of the application work goes into. So it's great to get started with, but you really got to have that drive to finish your app off. Yeah, I think it's really true. When that gentleman said that at the presentation, it's like that is dead on. That is so accurate. That really summarizes React Native so well. Okay, so we've got an invalid opcode right now on this thing. I think that the invalid opcode is actually good, I want to say, because invalid opcode probably means that we're failing the require statement right here. So I think that the test is actually working the way we expect. So what we're going to do is put this thing into a try catch block. Try catch E. We're going to assert false. And then we're going to do this right here. All right, let's try that out. Yeah, building a GPS app with geolocation API. Completely agree, Russ. Great example of that. It's like just getting the map up, showing stuff on the map. Yeah, it all works well, but it seems like there's just something slightly off with getting like geolocation, for example. It seems like it's slightly off on getting that stuff to work 100% of the time, or even like 99% of the time. It seems like for some reason something just goes wrong and it's really hard to debug. And a lot of the time it seems like it's exacerbated with Android for whatever reason. It seems like with Android, different devices struggle with some of these different APIs. I ran into the same issue with geolocation, where some Android devices worked fine with geolocation and then other ones just did not work the way I expected, or the map was incredibly laggy or whatever else. Hey, Alexander, good to hear. Which Ethereum course was it, just out of curiosity? I'd be really interested to hear which one or which courses are out there that you really enjoyed. Hey, Casey, welcome back as well. Okay, so last test here, approve request can be completed. Let's see, I think that we can do that. I think that's gonna be that. We're going to finalize approval of 0. Let me do that. All right, let's try this out. All right, hopefully this is our last test and we can get back on track for stuff today. Oh, Joshua, yeah. Oh, Joshua, I do the same thing. You develop the iOS version and at the very end, after everything iOS is working fine, then you go look at Android and you're like, oh, this doesn't work at all. Yeah, I know what you mean. All right, let's try this. All right, 7 tests passing, so I think we're good here. So that finishes kind of like phase 1 of what I wanted to accomplish this morning, which was to do a big rename of a lot of our stuff here. So we're now no longer working with crowdfunding stuff, we're now working with campaign stuff. I also did a refactor to the data structure of a campaign. So we're now storing a list of all the people who have approved, or excuse me, all the people who have donated to a campaign inside of a mapping rather than an array, which better follows some established patterns of solidity, to use a mapping here as opposed to the array. So that is looking great. I think that we can now go back on over to the actual application side of our project. So let's pull up the app as it stands right now. Here's localhost. We need to close out some of these tabs. Okay, so we've got our list of contracts on the screen. Here we go. These are all the deployed contracts. Now, these contracts at this point, let's see what's up with them. These contracts are not valid anymore, just because, I shouldn't say not valid, but these are old versions of our contracts I don't want to work with anymore, so I kind of want to get rid of those things. I think that we're going to have to redeploy our contract to the test network. I think that's the next thing to do here. I should have taken some notes on that deployment process because I'm trying to remember if there was some specific. Yeah. All right. So previously I've been working with a local test network. One thing that I noticed when working with a local test network is that all the transactions to contracts resolve way too quickly. That's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because when a transaction resolves very quickly, it allows us to test our code much faster. However, that is very poor from the perspective of wanting to test how your application actually works for users. So one thing that I arrived at last week as a decision was to use the public test network, which we refer to as Ropsten, which you can see right here, for testing and developing all these apps. However, with Ropsten, we now are working with essentially a real blockchain that I cannot just arbitrarily wipe on demand or as I please. So I think that we've got to do a little bit of work here to redeploy the contract. Let's see. I'm going to go to Truffle contracts. Nope, Truffle.js. I'm going to do that. Do that. I think I need to install this module here. This is all code that I had pasted over from another project. So I need to make sure I install this module on this project. Alexander, getting started with Ethereum Solidity Development by Sebastian Arbogast. Let's see, I'm going to look up his course really quick, just out of curiosity. So I'm looking at his course on my second monitor up here. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, Sebastian is a great teacher. He did a fantastic job with that course. I took a look at Alexander. I took a look at a couple of his videos, and yeah, he really did just a great job. I think that was very strong course that he put together. I think that he did have a big emphasis on the network aspect and making sure that you understand some like core concepts. I think that the goal of my course is just a little bit different because I want to make a course that's focused more on the application side and how we would actually use Ethereum stuff to build a real app. So I think he's got I think we got, essentially, honestly, I think we have two different courses that we're making here. That's my take on it. Okay, so we're just installing a couple of, or actually just one module here. Do you love all these warnings when you're doing an installation? Kind of terrifying. All right, so we'll go into Ether. Now we're going to redeploy our application to the test network Ropsten. So for that, I think we're going to do truffle. I'm going to compile first. Alexander, my take right now is I plan to do far less discussion about some of the intricacies of Ethereum. I really want people to just have kind of like a general idea of what's going on with the network, enough to understand some of its limitations. But I don't really want you to have to, I don't know, what's the best way of putting it? I don't want to put together like a PhD level course or like a master's level course on here is exactly how the Ethereum protocol and blockchain work. Like for example, I think Sebastian goes into detail on Merkle trees. I don't really intend to talk about Merkle trees at all. I want to just focus on how do we use this stuff to build something. That is the question I want to answer in my course, because I think that's kind of what's missing out there right now. I think that there's a lot of content to teach people about what Ethereum is, but not necessarily how do we apply it, in some meaningful way. That's my goal. So we're going to deploy to network Ropsten, like so. Alexander Lee, second Alexander, working on Ethereum. Right now, I'm deploying a new contract to a test network so I can start developing the React side of this application. This is going to be a crowdfunding application. So right now you see this like list of contracts thing. I know this looks like nothing right now, but this is essentially a list of crowdfunding campaigns that all exist on the Ethereum blockchain. So Alexander, I apologize, Alexander Wanschik, if I am not pronouncing your last name correctly. Right here, here's a good example of why I want to focus on using the test network with Ropsten. You can see that this process right here takes a long time to actually go through. If you're on a local network, it's near instantaneous, but I really want people to understand that all these operations that we undertake really take some serious amount of time. Alexander Lee, didn't we do this before? Oh yes, you were watching stream last week. Yes, you're totally correct. We did this before. Like I said previously, all these apps for these courses that I build, I usually build myself like 3 to 4 times, 3 probably minimum, to make sure that the application is like just really focused and crystal clear as to what's going on. So this is iteration like number 4 of this crowdfunding application. And this is just what I do for all these courses to make sure that it's really clear exactly what we're building and make sure that it has like laser focus and correctly covers some set number of topics. That's the goal with all these courses. All right, so here's our campaign factory. Here's the new address. There we go. How did I like simple templating versus React? I think that I'm going to take kind of like a hybrid approach, I guess, is my goal right now. So I had done a version of the app with React. I did HTML templating. And now this is a version with Next.js, which is server-side rendering framework for React. And I think that the final version is going to use Next.js. So with React, I found that for the course, I didn't want to introduce Redux. And I think you were probably there last week when I described why. Is because for an Ethereum course, I don't want to be talking about Redux if you don't know about Redux. That is so off topic from Ethereum. And I think people would get really irritated by that. So I think that React with Redux would be a great fit for an Ethereum application, but I did not want to have to do anything with Redux. So using only React with Ethereum is not a very good fit. That's what I learned from that version of the application. Using HTML templating, I think that was a very good fit. However, I think that's a little bit less interesting. So just classic HTML templating, just not quite as interesting from the standpoint of a course. I wanted to kind of fit React in here some way to make sure that if you know React, you can put those skills to use. And so I think that Next.js is a really happy medium because it kind of sidesteps some of the issues I was running into with React by itself in a single page application. So with Next.js, I'm making each of these page components right here. And each page is really its own kind of my goal here is to treat each page as its own separate, distinct little app. And without going into too much detail, that's going to essentially allow me to kind of sidestep some of the issues that I found with the React-only approach. But I haven't done enough work on the Next.js version just yet to really be able to confirm that. So I'll be able to have a better idea here very shortly as to what's going on. Okay, so now I'm refreshing the page. You'll notice that the list of contracts is now gone. That is because I just deployed the contract manager application. So I think that the first thing we need to do here is start thinking about how we can create new contracts. Now, one thing I noticed on Next.js last week was that navigating to like sub pages is really not implemented right now. We've only got this like top level routing. And so I think that I need to go look at some documentation again around Next and just make sure I have a really good idea on the best approach for these nested pages. It'd be really great as well to see a like large Next app in practice so I could get a better sense of some common patterns. So routing, I want like nested. Let's see if they have nothing on nested. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that you have to use a custom routing setup if you want to do any nested pages. Yeah, I searched for nested last week and Let's see. None of this looks relevant. Nested components, parent component being re-rendered, nope. Nested rept. Use relative, nope, that's not it. Custom routes, nope. Nested components, nope. 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 This looks relevant, but this is from 2016. All right, so yeah, I think we just gotta nest the directory. Okay, so we're gonna do a contracts directory here. And I think the first, oh wait, no, not contracts, that's not what we want. We want campaigns. Yeah, that's what we want. Oops. Campaigns, pains.js, like so. Now I've already got this index.js component page right here, which I'm really treating as like my index list of contracts. So I think that we have to figure out some of the routing stuff here and file location, but for right now, we'll just kind of let it fly. So inside of here, we're going to put in a new page that will, oops, I call it campaigns.js. It should be just campaigns, my bad. All right, so now in the campaigns directory, we've got this new page that we should be able to visit. I'm going to copy over some boilerplate right here. We'll do campaigns. Campaigns new. I don't think I need any of this whatsoever. We have no campaigns to render. I think all we really need right now is a form that a user can fill out to create a new crowdfunding campaign. So we'll do a form. Oh, you know what? I don't think we have to do any binding here because I think Next.js has support for bound methods like so. We'll find out really quickly, I guess. So event.pre-event default. Let's put in a div. Oh, I had also really wanted to make sure that I was approaching styling on this application a little bit earlier. I don't recall if I actually had put in a CSS library just yet. I don't think I did. I think I'm going to come back to that because that's really just tertiary right now, not very important. So let's do a label. Let's see, what labeling do we have here? Or what inputs? I'm not sure we have any inputs. Create campaign, minimum contribution, that's it. Minimum contribution. I'll do an input. I think that's it for right now, and we'll do a button. Looks good. So our event handler, and then we're going to do state of this dot state dot minimum, not state, but value. Minimum contribution. There we go. That looks good. And then again, I think we can use some ES7 here. So state the minimum contribution with empty string. Let's try this. See how we're doing. Make sure we don't have any errors. Yep, looks good. Refresh. Okay, looks good. We'll do contracts new. All right, well, that's not good. Page does not exist, contracts new. I'm pretty sure that does exist. Oh, campaigns. Whoops, yep. That's the bad side to renaming things, is I really don't remember. All right, can't resolve utils factory, that's totally okay. I just haven't updated the import link just yet, but I don't actually need that stuff just yet, so we'll just do a comment out just to get things displaying on the screen. All right, so there we go, there's our form. All right, now the next thing we have to do is actually create the contract. Boy, this all feels really familiar. Really feel like we've done some of this stuff before. Okay, so we've got our contract, our factory contract to be precise. So we're gonna go up one more directory. We're also gonna need a reference to Web3 here, I think. Maybe we need that, maybe we don't. I don't think we do. We'll kill it. So now on submit, we're going to call our factory dot. We did this before just like a moment ago inside of our tests. So we're going to do a call to campaign. So factory dot methods create campaign dot want to specifically call this thing like so. Oh, not wrong side, async event. Yeah, that looks better. So we're going to call this. I don't recall if it takes any arguments that we need to specify. Yeah, it does. The minimum contribution. So that'll be this dot state dot minimum contribution. And then I don't think we need a second argument here just yet. So we'll do a console log address and see what happens. Okay, so console log address now. We get our hot reload. Interesting. Don't know what that's about. Assuming component, let's see, I think I probably made a typo somewhere in here. What did we do? We got input, value, state, set state, minimum contribution. Do I have a typo? Oh, e.target.value. That's better. All right, so there we go. Minimum contribution, that looks good. Now, what's next? What's next? Let's actually do a refresh because I bet that actually broke the form, to be honest. All right, so we're gonna do minimum contribution of 100 ether. We'll create, and we get a nice error message. Cannot read property call of undefined. That's okay. Let's just do a debugger. I'm gonna figure out what's going on here. I guess we got to refresh. All right, so here's our debugger. Do factory 2.default.methods. So here's our methods. Create crowdfund, not create campaign. Boy, what's, I think create campaign. Something's funky here with our renaming. Looks like this renaming didn't actually take place. Okay, unfortunately, I do have a appointment at, believe it or not, the DMV. So I think that right now, I'm gonna stop stream for a little bit. I'm gonna go take care of that appointment. And I'm gonna be back in like an hour. And we're gonna keep streaming this thing. I think that tonight's or today's, I guess this afternoon's stream is gonna go until I finish this application because I really need to get this thing done. So I will catch all of you in about an hour or so, and we're gonna drive this thing through to completion. So it should be fun. As usual, if you come back here, I'm always happy to answer any questions as I work through this stuff. So I hope to see everyone back in a little bit. And yeah, so catch you guys later.